I'm Emma, 22 years old. When my father died, he left my college fund under the control of my stepmother, Linda. She promised to protect my future, but instead, she drained it to save her failing business, gave my room to her kids, and pushed me into the attic. By 19, I was sleeping in my car, working 2 jobs, and hiding the truth from everyone, until one unexpected encounter changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. Growing up in Carlsbad, California, life was pretty perfect. My dad, Michael Rodriguez, owned a landscaping company that he built from nothing into something amazing. My mom, Sarah, taught 3rd grade and made the world's best churros every Sunday after church. We lived in this beautiful 4-bedroom house with a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine, which made sense since Dad designed it himself. I was Daddy's little girl and Mom's best friend all rolled into one. Every Saturday, we'd drive down to Encinitas Beach, and Dad would teach me to surf while Mom sketched us from the shore. She always said I got my artistic eye from her and my stubborn determination from him. That combination's going to take you places, mija, she'd tell me while hanging my latest drawing on the refrigerator. Dad had big dreams for me. The day I was born, he started a college fund. Education is your ticket to anywhere, Emma, he'd say every time he made a deposit. No one can ever take that away from you. Those words would haunt me later, but back then, they just made me feel safe and loved. Then, when I was 10, everything shattered in a single phone call. Mom was driving home from a parent-teacher conference on a rainy Tuesday night when an 18-wheeler ran a red light. She died instantly. That phone call didn't just take my mother, it broke my father into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. For 5 years, it was just Dad and me against the world. He threw himself into work during the day and into being both parents at night. I learned to cook basic Mexican dishes from Mom's recipe cards, and Dad learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. We were a team, damaged but determined to honor Mom's memory by taking care of each other. The college fund kept growing. Dad never missed a deposit, even during the rough months after Mom died when money was tight and grief was heavy. I was 15 when Dad met Linda at a Chamber of Commerce networking event. She was everything Mom wasn't. Blonde, polished, aggressive in business, and completely focused on success. She sold luxury real estate in La Jolla and drove a white BMW that always looked like it had just been detailed. Emma, honey, she'd say with this perfect smile, your father talks about you constantly. You must be so proud of what he's built. She'd bring me expensive art supplies and ask about my drawings with what seemed like genuine interest. For the first time since Mom died, I saw my dad smile the way he used to. Linda had 2 kids from her previous marriage. Jake was 20, a junior at USC studying business, and he seemed genuinely cool. He'd actually sit and talk to me about movies and music instead of treating me like an annoying little sister. Madison was 17, 2 years older than me, and she was everything I wasn't. Instagram beautiful, popular, confident in that way that only comes from never having to worry about anything. 8 months after they met, Dad and Linda got married in a small ceremony at Del Mar Beach. I was happy for him. After years of watching him carry grief like a weight on his shoulders, seeing him laugh again felt like a miracle. Linda and her kids moved into our house, and suddenly our quiet home was full of life again. At first, it felt like what I'd always imagined having siblings would be like. Madison and I shared clothes and did homework together. Jake would drive us places and act all protective when guys looked at us. But things started changing in small ways that I told myself I was imagining. The photos of Mom that had been throughout the house started disappearing. We should focus on our new family, Linda would say when I asked. It's not healthy to live in the past, sweetheart. Our Sunday churro tradition got replaced with Linda's yoga and green juice routine. Dad seemed to think these changes were good for everyone. When Dad was around, Linda was the perfect stepmother. She'd ask about my grades, compliment my art, and include me in family planning. But when Dad was at work, something shifted. The warmth would drain from her eyes, and her voice would get this edge to it. Madison needs the bigger room, she announced one day when I came home from school. She has more things, and you're barely here anyway with all your after-school activities. My childhood bedroom, with its perfect morning light for drawing, became Madison's walk-in closet for her Instagram content creation. By the time I was 17, Dad's health started declining. Stress from expanding the business, combined with diabetes and high blood pressure, meant more doctor visits and medication management. Linda took charge completely, insisting that Dad focus on work while she handled everything else. "I'll take care of your father," she'd tell me when I offered to help with his appointments. "You just focus on school. That's what he wants." But school became harder to focus on when my art supplies kept getting accidentally damaged, and my homework mysteriously went missing right before big deadlines. Madison would look genuinely sorry while explaining how she'd accidentally spilled coffee on my history project. But there was something in her eyes that didn't match her apology. Linda convinced Dad to make Jake the business manager to help with the stress. Within months, the company started losing clients. Family dinners became business meetings where Linda would spread financial documents across the table and talk about difficult decisions and necessary sacrifices. "Emma's college fund could help us through this rough patch," I heard Linda tell Dad one night when they thought I was asleep. "Just temporarily. We'll pay it back once things stabilize." I felt sick. That money represented every extra hour Dad had worked, every sacrifice he'd made, every dream he had for my future. Dad's first heart attack happened during my senior year, right before college applications were due. Linda was with him at the hospital, making all the decisions, talking to all the doctors. When I tried to visit, she'd intercept me in the waiting room. "He needs rest, Emma. Too much excitement isn't good for his heart." But Jake and Madison could visit whenever they wanted. Dad died on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 weeks before my 19th birthday. I was in my dorm room at UCSD, cramming for finals, when Linda called. "Emma, you need to come home. Your father." Her voice broke in what sounded like genuine grief. "He had another heart attack. He's gone." I drove home in shock, barely remembering the trip from campus to Carlsbad. When I walked into our house, Linda's house now, the first thing I noticed was how different it felt. Linda was on the phone with funeral directors, calmly making arrangements like she was planning a business conference. Jake was handling paperwork, and Madison was posting about family loss on Instagram with perfectly applied mascara tears. I felt like a stranger at my own father's funeral. Linda had planned everything without asking my input. The service was held at a church Dad had never attended, with a minister who had clearly never met him. During the eulogy, Linda spoke about their passionate love story and how Dad had found happiness again after years of sadness. There was no mention of his terrible dad jokes, his love for old Metallica albums, or the way he'd sing off-key Spanish songs while cooking breakfast. The man being eulogized wasn't my father. He was Linda's husband. I sat in the front row feeling completely disconnected from everything happening around me. Uncle David was there, Dad's older brother who'd made a fortune in tech up in Silicon Valley. We'd lost touch after Mom died, and he looked uncomfortable throughout the service. When he tried to approach me after the ceremony, Linda quickly guided me toward other relatives who wanted to offer condolences. The will reading happened 3 days later in a sterile conference room that smelled like coffee and disappointment. Dad had updated his will after marrying Linda, which I expected. The house went to Linda, the business went to Linda. But my college fund, my future, stayed mine, with one devastating catch. Linda was named as trustee until I turned 25. "Your father wanted to ensure your money was managed responsibly," the lawyer explained, while Linda nodded sympathetically. "Mrs. Rodriguez will oversee all educational expenses and ensure the funds last through graduate school if you choose that path." I should have known right then that my life was about to become a nightmare. The change in Linda wasn't gradual, it was immediate and complete. The night after the will reading, she called a family meeting. Jake and Madison sat on either side of her on the couch, like some twisted parody of a united front. I sat alone in Dad's old armchair, trying not to think about how it still smelled like his cologne. "Now that we've handled all the legal matters, we need to discuss some changes," Linda began, her voice businesslike and cold. "Emma, you'll be moving to the smaller bedroom upstairs. Jake needs your room since he'll be working from home managing the business, and he needs space for his equipment." I started to protest, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "This house belongs to me now, and I'll decide how the space is used. Your father would want what's best for the family, not just one person." That night, I moved my belongings to the converted attic room, a cramped space with sloped ceilings and no air conditioning. Many of my things didn't make the transition. My art easel was too big for the small space. Photo albums with pictures of Mom and Dad were stored safely in the garage. The room that had been mine for 17 years became Jake's home office within a week. Living in that house became psychological warfare. Linda would critique everything I did, from how I dressed to how I studied. "Your father worked himself to death providing for you," she'd say whenever I asked for anything. "The least you could do is show some gratitude and respect for this family." Jake started treating me like unpaid help, demanding I do his laundry or clean up after him. "We're family now," he'd say with a smirk. "Family helps family." Madison was less direct but equally cruel, borrowing my clothes without asking and returning them stained or damaged. As trustee, Linda controlled every dollar of my education money. School supplies became luxuries I had to justify. When I needed a new laptop for college work, she made me submit a written request explaining why the family's old desktop computer wasn't sufficient. "I have a fiduciary responsibility," she'd remind me constantly. "Your father trusted me to make wise decisions with his money." Meanwhile, Jake got a new Audi for graduation, and Madison's Instagram lifestyle was funded by mysterious sources that definitely weren't her part-time job at Nordstrom. Starting at UCSD felt like being able to breathe again. Living in the dorms, sharing a small room with my roommate Jessica, felt like paradise compared to the hostile environment at Linda's house. I threw myself into my studies, joined the Latino Student Union, and slowly started rebuilding the confidence that had been systematically destroyed over the past year. I went home as little as possible, usually just for major holidays. Each visit was worse than the last. My attic room had been progressively emptied of my belongings, with more of my things relegated to boxes in the garage each time I returned. During winter break of my sophomore year, Linda sat me down for what she called a financial review. "The business is struggling more than we anticipated," she said, spreading papers across the dining room table. "We need to make some difficult decisions about expenses." The difficult decision, it turned out, was cutting my funding. My tuition would still be covered, but housing, books, and living expenses were now my responsibility. "The investments from your trust haven't performed as well as expected," Linda explained with fake sympathy. "We need to be more conservative with the remaining funds to ensure they last through graduation." When I asked to see the actual account statements, Linda's mask slipped for just a moment. "I don't appreciate your lack of trust, Emma. Your father appointed me as trustee because he knew I would make responsible decisions. If you can't accept that, perhaps you should consider funding your education entirely on your own." I was trapped. Without access to the financial records, I had no way to prove anything was wrong. I picked up extra hours at my campus job and found a second job waiting tables at a restaurant near school. My grades suffered as I balanced work and studies, but I was determined to graduate. Everything exploded during spring break of my junior year. I'd come home to Linda's house temporarily while looking for summer housing near campus. When I walked into what used to be my room, I found it had been completely converted into a home gym, complete with expensive equipment that was clearly new. "You're hardly ever here," Linda said when I confronted her, not even looking up from her phone. "It made no sense to keep a room empty when Jake needs a place to work out. You can sleep on the couch while you're visiting." That evening, as I sorted through my water-damaged belongings in the garage, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Linda and Jake were in the kitchen, and they didn't realize I could hear every word. "The trust fund has been a lifesaver," Linda was saying. "Without it, we would have lost the business last year." "How much longer can we keep using it?" Jake asked. "Until she turns 25 or graduates. The terms are specific, but I've been careful, moving small amounts at a time. By the time she could challenge anything, the money will be fully integrated into the business operations." "What if she figures it out?" "She has no proof and no resources to fight us legally. Your father was meticulous about the paperwork. On paper, everything looks like legitimate investments that didn't perform as expected." I felt physically ill listening to them casually discuss stealing my future. The business troubles were fabricated. An excuse to systematically drain the college fund Dad had spent 17 years building. That night, lying on the uncomfortable couch in what had once been my home, I made a decision. I couldn't confront Linda directly, not yet. I needed to become completely self-sufficient, document everything I could, and build a case for when I had the resources to fight back. The next morning, I told Linda I'd found summer housing in San Diego with friends. It was a lie, but I needed to escape before my anger betrayed me. My first night sleeping in my Honda Accord in a Walmart parking lot was the most terrifying experience of my life. Every sound made me jump. Every passing car, a potential threat. I'd arranged my few possessions in the back seat and trunk, creating a small sleeping space in the reclined driver's seat. The Honda Civic that Dad had bought me for my 16th birthday became my only home. I developed a routine out of necessity. A 24-hour gym membership gave me access to showers and a safe place to spend time during extreme weather. I learned to arrive early, around 5:30 in the morning, when the gym was nearly empty. I could shower, change, and prepare for the day without drawing attention to my situation. Finding safe parking spots became an art form. I rotated between several locations, the Walmart lot, a quiet residential street near campus, and occasionally the parking garage at the mall where security was minimal. I never stayed in one place more than 2 nights in a row to avoid detection. My first job was at the Starbucks on campus. The early shift suited my new schedule, and the manager was impressed by my willingness to work when others preferred to sleep in. The free coffee and discounted food were crucial perks, but more importantly, it gave me a legitimate place to be during the day. Evenings and weekends, I worked at Target, stocking shelves and handling inventory. Between both jobs, I was working nearly 70 hours a week, leaving little time to dwell on my circumstances. Every dollar went into a new bank account Linda knew nothing about, building a safety net for the coming school year. The physical toll was immense. My back ached constantly from sleeping in the car seat. Summer in San Diego brought heat and humidity that made sleep nearly impossible. I kept windows cracked for air, but worried constantly about security. Rainstorms were the worst, filling the car with moisture that never quite dried. I organized my life around systems. Clothes went in space-saving vacuum bags stored in the trunk. A small cooler held basic perishables, refreshed daily with ice from Starbucks. My laptop and important documents stayed with me always in a backpack that never left my side. Personal hygiene required creativity. Dry shampoo became essential for days when I couldn't get to the gym before work. Baby wipes served for quick cleanups. I kept my appearance meticulously neat, knowing that looking disheveled might raise questions about my living situation. The campus library became my sanctuary during free hours, air-conditioned, quiet, and free. I would arrive when it opened and often stay until closing, making use of study rooms and computer labs. The librarians came to know me as a dedicated student, never suspecting I had nowhere else to go. Meals were planned for maximum economy and convenience. Starbucks provided breakfast, often pastries that would otherwise be discarded. Lunch was usually something that didn't require refrigeration, peanut butter sandwiches, or energy bars. Dinner came from grocery store ready-made salads or sandwiches, eaten in my car or at a park bench. As fall semester began, I added classes to my already overwhelming schedule. I arranged my work hours around my course load, often rushing from morning classes to afternoon shifts, then studying late into the night in empty campus buildings before returning to my car to sleep. My professors noticed the change in me. My work, once exemplary, was now merely adequate. I looked perpetually exhausted, and my participation in class discussions had diminished significantly. Dr. Martinez, my marketing professor, asked me to stay after class one day. "Emma, is everything all right? Your last paper wasn't up to your usual standard, and you seem exhausted." I manufactured a story about working extra hours to save for graduate school, thanking her for her concern, but assuring her I was managing fine. Dr. Martinez didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press further. She did, however, extend the deadline for my next assignment, a small kindness that brought me to tears once I was alone. As autumn turned colder, new challenges emerged. My car's heater worked, but running it all night would waste precious gas money. I invested in a high-quality sleeping bag, rated for low temperatures, and layered my clothing at night. On the coldest nights, I sometimes splurged on a cheap motel room, justifying the expenses necessary for my health and ability to continue working and studying. The loneliness was crushing. I spoke to people all day at my jobs, but could never share my true situation. The few friends I had from college were busy with their own lives, and I avoided their calls and messages rather than lie directly about my circumstances. I had been living this double life for over 4 months when fate intervened in the most unexpected way. It was a Thursday morning in late October, and I was working the opening shift at Starbucks. The morning rush had just subsided when a familiar voice ordered a simple black coffee. Looking up, I froze in complete shock. Uncle David stood before me, older and grayer than I remembered from Dad's funeral, but unmistakably the same man who used to bring me elaborate tech gadgets for Christmas when I was little. He seemed equally surprised, staring at me with furrowed brows. "Emma, is that you?" I nodded, suddenly conscious of how much weight I'd lost, how exhausted I must look despite my efforts to appear normal. "Hi, Uncle David. It's been a while. What are you doing working here?" he asked, his tone concerned rather than judgmental. "I thought you were focusing on your studies at UCSD. Linda mentioned you were doing well." The mention of Linda's name sent a surge of anger through me, but I forced a smile. "Just working part-time, saving money for the future." David stepped aside to let other customers order, but I could feel his eyes on me throughout the rest of the rush. When my coworker arrived to cover for me during my break, he motioned me over to a corner table. "Emma, you look exhausted," he said gently. "Is everything all right?" Maybe it was the genuine concern in his voice, or the accumulated stress of months of pretending, but something in me broke. Tears filled my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to be crying at work. "I get off at 2, I said quietly. "Could we talk then?" David nodded, his expression serious. "I'll come back. We definitely need to talk." Those 4 hours were the longest of my life. When my shift finally ended, I found David waiting in his Tesla Model S, a car that made my weathered Honda look even more pathetic. He suggested we go somewhere for lunch, and I directed him to a small cafe where I knew the food was reasonably priced. Over sandwiches and coffee, the whole story poured out of me, the gradual takeover of my home after Dad died, Linda's control of my trust fund, the conversion of my bedroom to a gym, the overheard conversation about using my money to save the business, my current living situation in my car, working 2 jobs while trying to maintain my studies. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each new detail. When I finally finished, he was silent for a long moment, hands clasped tightly on the table. "I had no idea," he finally said, his voice tight with anger. "I knew Linda and I had our differences, but I never imagined she would do this to you, to David's daughter." He shook his head. "I should have stayed more involved after your father died. This is partly my fault." "You couldn't have known," I said, suddenly feeling lighter for having shared my burden. Linda was careful to keep us separated. David reached across the table and took my hand. "This ends today, Emma. No niece of mine is going to live in her car while that woman steals her inheritance. Come with me right now." I hesitated, pride and independence warring with desperate need. "I don't want to be a burden, Uncle David." His expression softened. "You are family, Emma, the only family I have left. You could never be a burden." His voice broke slightly. "Your father would be heartbroken to see you living like this. Please let me help you." David's reaction was immediate and decisive. After lunch, he insisted on seeing my car, his face growing grimmer as he took in the neatly organized but undeniably makeshift living arrangement. My few possessions were carefully stowed in the trunk and back seat. A small pillow and blanket were arranged on the reclined driver's seat. A cooler in the passenger footwell held a few perishable food items. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "Pack whatever you need for tonight. You're coming to my house immediately." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. David's house in Palo Alto was exactly what I'd expected from a successful tech entrepreneur. Modern, minimalist, and equipped with every possible convenience. He gave me a guest suite with my own bathroom, fresh towels, and even a spare set of pajamas his housekeeper had found. The luxury was overwhelming after months of deprivation. But more than that, it was the feeling of safety. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear. Over breakfast the next morning, David outlined his plan. "I've already called my attorney. We're meeting him at 10 o'clock. I want you to tell him exactly what you told me yesterday. Every detail you can remember about Linda's management of your trust." David's attorney, Mr. Greenberg, was a sharp-featured man with piercing eyes and a reputation as one of San Francisco's most formidable litigators. He listened intently as I recounted my story, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "Based on what you've described," he said when I finished, "we have strong grounds to petition for Linda's removal as trustee. The conversion of trust assets for personal or business use is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. The court takes a very dim view of trustees who commingle funds or use them for unauthorized purposes." "What about the things Linda said about investments not performing well?" I asked. Mr. Greenberg smiled thinly. "Financial records don't lie, Miss Rodriguez. If Linda has been transferring money from your trust to the business, there will be a paper trail. My forensic accountant will find it." The investigation moved quickly. Mr. Greenberg obtained court orders for all records related to my trust fund and the family business. David insisted I focus on my studies, while they handled the legal aspects, offering me a place in his home for as long as I needed. I reduced my work hours to a manageable level, keeping only the Starbucks job that I actually enjoyed. For the first time in months, I could breathe. 2 weeks later, Mr. Greenberg called us in for a meeting. Spread across his conference table were financial statements, bank records, and business documents. His expression was grim but satisfied. "We found it," he said without preamble. "Over the past 3 years, Linda has systematically diverted funds from Emma's trust into the family business. The transfers were disguised as investments, but there was never any formal loan agreement or equity exchange. The business has been operating at a loss for years, and Linda has been using the trust as her personal slush fund." The numbers were staggering. Nearly $200,000 had been diverted from my education trust, leaving less than a quarter of what should have been available. In addition, Linda had been paying herself excessive trustee fees and using trust assets to cover personal expenses for herself and her children. "This goes beyond civil violations," Mr. Greenberg continued. "There's enough evidence here for criminal charges of fraud and embezzlement. The question is how you want to proceed." David looked to me. "This is your decision, Emma. We can pursue criminal charges, or we can focus on recovering your assets through civil action. Either way, Linda will be removed as trustee immediately." I thought about Linda, Jake, and Madison, who had systematically pushed me out of my own home and stolen my inheritance. I thought about sleeping in my car through summer heat and autumn chill. I thought about working until my hands cracked and my back ached, all while they lived comfortably on money my father had saved for my future. "Both," I said firmly. "I want to pursue both criminal and civil action. What they did was wrong, and they should face consequences for it." The meeting was scheduled for Mr. Greenberg's office the following week. Linda arrived with her own attorney, a nervous-looking man who seemed overwhelmed by the situation. She maintained her composure until Mr. Greenberg began methodically presenting the evidence, at which point her carefully constructed facade began to crack. "These were legitimate business investments," she insisted, her voice rising. "Michael would have wanted the company preserved for Emma's future." "Then why was there no formal investment agreement?" Mr. Greenberg countered calmly. "Why were the transfers concealed in the trust accounting? And why were personal expenses for Jake and Madison being paid from trust assets?" Linda's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she brushed him off. "I was doing what was best for the family. The business needed capital, and the trust was just sitting there earning minimal returns." "It wasn't just sitting there," I said, finding my voice for the first time during the meeting. "It was my future. It was meant for my education and security, not for saving a failing business or buying Jake a car." Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked at me. "You were always so entitled, Emma. Always expecting special treatment because you were Michael's precious daughter. He spoiled you, and look how you repay his memory, attacking the family business he built." David, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "The business was failing because of your mismanagement, Linda, not because of Emma. Michael built a profitable company that you ran into the ground, and then you stole from his daughter to cover your mistakes." Linda turned to David, her expression venomous. "You were always jealous of Michael's success, his family. That's why you swooped in to turn Emma against me. You couldn't stand to see me carrying on his legacy." "My brother and I had our differences," David said calmly. "But he would be disgusted by what you've done, using his daughter's inheritance to prop up your failing business while she sleeps in her car. That's not carrying on any legacy Michael would recognize." The revelation that I had been homeless seemed to briefly pierce Linda's armor. For a moment, genuine shock crossed her face before she composed herself again. If Emma chose to live in her car rather than accept the reasonable boundaries of our home, that was her decision, she said coldly. The meeting ended with Mr. Greenberg presenting Linda with two options. Agree to a settlement that would include her immediate removal as trustee, full restitution of misappropriated funds, and her resignation from the family business, or face both civil and criminal proceedings. Linda's attorney finally managed to make himself heard, pulling his client aside for a private consultation. When they returned, Linda grudgingly agreed to the settlement terms, though her eyes promised retribution, but the most explosive confrontation was yet to come. David insisted on accompanying me to collect my remaining belongings from Linda's house. I was nervous about the confrontation, but David's presence gave me strength I hadn't felt in years. When we arrived, Linda was clearly shocked to see us together. She quickly composed herself, switching into her fake concerned stepmother mode. "Emma, where have you been? We've been worried sick," she exclaimed, though her eyes were cold. "Worried?" David replied before I could speak. "She's been sleeping in her car for 4 months because you made her homeless." Linda's mask slipped immediately. If she chose to leave rather than follow reasonable house rules, that's not my fault. "Show us her room," David demanded. Linda reluctantly led us upstairs to what had been my childhood bedroom. It was now completely converted into Madison's content creation studio, with professional lighting equipment, a ring light, and racks of designer clothes. Every trace of my 17 years in that room had been erased. "Where are Emma's belongings?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We stored everything safely in the garage," Linda said defensively. "In the garage, we found my possessions in water-damaged boxes, many of my treasured items ruined or missing entirely. But among the boxes, I found something precious. Photo albums with pictures of Mom and Dad that I thought were lost forever. Those belong to this family," Linda said when she saw me clutching the albums. "My mother belongs to me," I replied, surprised by the strength in my own voice. It was then that Jake appeared, looking aggressive and territorial. "What are you doing here? You can't just come into our house making demands." "This was Michael's house," David said firmly, "and Emma has every right to her belongings." Jake stepped forward threateningly. "You need to leave now, old man." David, who was 6'2" and still in excellent shape despite being in his 40s, didn't back down. "Try me, kid." That's when Linda lost it completely. "Call the police," she screamed. "They're attacking us." Madison appeared with her phone, recording everything for what I assume she thought would be evidence of our assault on their family. But I'd had enough. Months of anger, frustration, and betrayal finally boiled over. "Stop!" I shouted, loud enough that everyone froze. "Just stop, all of you." I turned to Linda, years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "You killed my father with stress, stole my money, and made me homeless. And for what? So Jake could drive an Audi and Madison could play Instagram influencer?" Linda's face twisted with fury. "Your father died because he was weak, just like you." Before I could think, my hand moved on its own. The slap echoed through the garage, and Linda staggered backward, her hand flying to her cheek. "Don't you ever talk about my father like that," I said, my voice shaking but my eyes fierce. "I'm done being your victim." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda stared at me in shock, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt strong. David stepped beside me, his voice deadly calm. "I've been recording this entire conversation, Linda. Everything you've said, everything you've done. My lawyer will find all of this very interesting." "You have no proof of anything," Linda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "Bank records don't lie," David replied. "Neither do homeless shelter intake protocols or the photos Emma took of her living conditions." Linda's face went pale as she realized the full scope of what we had documented. "We'll see you in court, Linda," David said as we loaded my recovered belongings into his car. "Be ready." The legal process moved swiftly once all the evidence was assembled. Linda was removed as trustee immediately, with David appointed in her place. The court ordered full restitution of all diverted funds, plus interest. Linda was forced to sell her ownership in the family business to pay the judgment, with the company itself placed under professional management. Despite agreeing to the settlement, Linda still faced criminal charges. The district attorney, presented with the evidence Mr. Greenberg had gathered, pursued the case independently. Linda eventually accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and a permanent mark on her record that would prevent her from serving as a trustee or financial manager in the future. The business, once freed from Linda's mismanagement, began to recover under professional leadership. David hired managers who provided regular reports, educating me about the company my father had built so I could eventually decide whether to sell it or take an active role in its operation. But the most important recovery was my own. Living with David in his Palo Alto home, I slowly began to heal from years of psychological abuse. He insisted I see a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Kim, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. What you experienced was systematic abuse, Dr. Kim explained during one of our sessions. The isolation, the financial control, the gaslighting, these are all classic patterns. Your response wasn't weakness, it was survival. Slowly, with professional guidance and David's unwavering support, I began to rebuild my sense of self-worth. I established new routines that nurtured rather than depleted me. I learned to cook nutritious meals in a real kitchen, finding joy in the simple luxury of preparing food in a retried T-Continue-Edit safe space, where no one would criticize or question my choices. My academic performance rebounded dramatically once my living situation stabilized. Professors who had noted my decline now commented on my renewed engagement and improved work. Dr. Martinez, who had shown me kindness during my darkest period, became a valued mentor, guiding my interest in business ethics toward a potential career path. David and I established a new kind of family relationship, different from what I'd had with Dad, but equally valuable. We had dinner together every Sunday, creating our own tradition. He shared stories about my father's youth, their early business ventures together, and the dreams they'd both had for their futures. "Your father always said you got the best of both your parents," David told me one evening over dinner. "Sarah's artistic eye and compassion, Michael's determination and business sense. He knew you were going to do something special with your life." Through David's memories, I gained a fuller picture of the man my father had been. Before grief changed him, I learned about his struggles building the landscaping business, his devotion to my mother, and his unwavering belief in the power of education to transform lives. The legal resolution provided more than just financial restitution. It gave me validation. The courts had recognized the wrong done to me, affirming that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the mistreatment. This official acknowledgement helped counteract years of gaslighting and self-doubt. As my immediate crisis receded, I began volunteering at a youth shelter in San Diego, using my experience to help other young people facing housing insecurity. I understood their pride, their shame, their desperate need for normalcy in a way that most volunteers couldn't. Without revealing the details of my own story, I could offer genuine empathy and practical advice. I knew which gyms had the best shower facilities, which parking lots were safest for overnight stays, and which restaurants were most likely to offer leftover food to someone who looked hungry but couldn't afford to buy anything. This volunteer work eventually led to a part-time position, coordinating services for college students experiencing homelessness, an invisible population larger than most people realize. The work was meaningful and healing, allowing me to transform my painful experience into something constructive. My academic focus shifted as my personal experiences informed my professional interests. I added courses in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship to my business curriculum, envisioning a career that would balance financial success with social impact. My senior thesis examined housing insecurity among college students, drawing attention to a growing problem while proposing practical solutions. The research opened doors to internships and networking opportunities I never would have considered before my own experience with homelessness. Graduation day was a triumph I had once feared might never come. David sat proudly in the audience as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with honors. In that moment, I felt my father's presence strongly. His dream for my education finally fulfilled despite every obstacle Linda had thrown in my path. The girl who had slept in her car just 2 years earlier was now graduating summa cum laude, with a degree in business administration and a clear vision for her future. After graduation, I faced a decision about the family business. With David's guidance, I had learned enough about its operations to understand both its potential and its challenges. Rather than selling immediately or stepping directly into management, I chose a middle path. I retained ownership but installed an experienced management team, setting clear ethical guidelines and employee-centered policies. I would serve on the board and learn the business gradually, while pursuing my own career in social enterprise. The trust fund that had been the source of so much conflict was now under David's careful stewardship, with transparent reporting and joint decision-making. When I turned 25, the remaining inheritance would transfer to my control, a prospect that no longer filled me with anxiety. David had taught me financial management skills my father never had the chance to share, preparing me to handle my inheritance responsibly. Throughout this journey of recovery and rebuilding, I learned profound lessons that continue to shape my life today. I learned that family is defined by love and loyalty, not merely by blood or legal ties. David became more real family to me than Linda had ever been, despite her marriage to my father. I learned the value of asking for help, a lesson that didn't come easily to someone who had survived through fierce independence. Accepting David's assistance, Dr. Kim's guidance, and my friend's support didn't diminish my strength. It multiplied it. I learned about the insidious nature of emotional and financial abuse, how it distorts reality and erodes self-worth so gradually that victims often don't recognize what's happening until the damage is severe. This understanding made me both more compassionate toward others and more protective of my own boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that resilience isn't about weathering hardship alone. It's about finding ways to keep moving forward despite obstacles, whether that means sleeping in your car and showering at a gym, or accepting help from a family member you hadn't spoken to in years. The strength isn't in the specific strategy. It's in the refusal to surrender to circumstances. 3 years have passed since David found me working at that Starbucks, looking exhausted and thin. Today, my life bears little resemblance to those dark days. I have a fulfilling career working with a foundation that addresses youth homelessness. I own a beautiful apartment in San Francisco, close enough to visit David regularly, but far enough to maintain my independence. I have meaningful relationships with people who know my full story and love me anyway. I've learned to trust again, to open my heart without fear that someone will use my vulnerabilities against me. The pain of my past hasn't disappeared entirely. I still have moments of grief for my parents, flashes of anger at Linda's betrayal, and occasional nightmares about living in my car. But these emotional echoes no longer control my life or define my identity. They're simply part of a story that shaped me but doesn't limit me. Linda, Jake, and Madison moved to Nevada after the settlement, their finances and reputations in ruins. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Linda lost her real estate license, Jake had to drop out of his MBA program, and Madison's influencer career collapsed when the money for content production dried up. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that they were no longer part of my life, and hope that maybe they learned something from the consequences of their actions. David and I have built something beautiful together, a family based on choice rather than obligation, love rather than control. He walked me down the aisle at my wedding last year, and when people ask about my family, I speak of him with the same pride I once reserved for my father. If you're watching this and seeing yourself in my story, I need you to know something. You deserve better. If you're living in your car, couch surfing, or staying in a situation that destroys your spirit because you think you have no other choice, you deserve better. If someone is using money to control you, isolating you from potential support systems, or making you question your own reality, that's not love. That's not family. That's abuse, and you don't have to accept it. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. It's about who sees your potential when you can't see it yourself. It's about who fights for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. Your story isn't over. Mine wasn't either. I thought my life was ruined at 19 when I was sleeping in my car and working 2 jobs just to survive. I couldn't imagine a future beyond just getting through each day. But sometimes the worst chapters of our lives are just setting us up for the most beautiful ones. The person who might change your life could be someone you haven't spoken to in years, or someone you haven't met yet. The strength you need might come from resources you don't yet recognize. The future you're meant to have might look nothing like what you're experiencing right now. Don't give up. Don't let anyone convince you that you deserve less than love, respect, and the chance to build the life you want. You are worth fighting for, especially when, you have to be the one doing the fighting. If this story resonated with you, please share it. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone, that their situation can change, that they deserve better than what they're experiencing. If you're experiencing financial abuse, document everything. Keep records, take photos, save texts and emails. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And remember that asking for help isn't giving up, it's being smart. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves a family that lifts them up instead of tearing them down. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about overcoming impossible circumstances and building the life you deserve. And please, share your own story in the comments. Whether you're still in the struggle or you've made it to the other side, your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. Remember, your story is still being written. The next chapter might be better than you can possibly imagine. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for believing that broken things can be rebuilt stronger than before. And thank you for reminding me that sharing our stories, the hard, messy, beautiful truth of our lives, is how we help each other find the light. Take care of yourselves out there. You matter more than you know.